Welcome to everybody. My name is Orosz. I'm the program manager and research coordinator of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade. And it is my pleasure to moderate the online discussion entitled The Future of the Belgrade-Pristina Dialogue in the Context of the Changing Politics in Kosovo. I will have two excellent partners in this panel who will help me to shed light on details of this interesting topic. Let me first introduce from Kosovo, Donika Emini, who is the executive director of the Civikos platform and who is also an expert of the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group. My other speaking partner is Igor Novaković, who is the research director of the International Security Affairs Center in Belgrade. Thank you for both of you for accepting our invitation and taking part in this discussion. Before we start, let me share some technical information. As this is an online webinar, I would kindly ask everyone who is I would like to ask everyone who would like to raise questions during or after the discussion to share the question via the chat. You can find the chat sign just in the bottom line, so you can raise a question. And I mean, those who might not be able to join here right now or will lose connection somehow, they have also the possibility to follow us on Facebook Live, which is already launched. Thank you very much for joining, and it's high time to start our online discussion. Just as a short discussion for a short introduction for our topic, I believe there are two things to be mentioned in the very beginning. As we are talking about the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, it has to be noted that's already a decade since it has started. Of course, first it started as a technical dialogue in 2011, but already in 2013, the Brussels Agreement was signed, and just this Monday, it was the 8th anniversary of this development of the dialogue. Since then, lots of things happened, and there were some achievements, but I would say that there are even more critics and contradictions when it comes to the implementation of the dialogue, and I believe it's important to highlight first what has been achieved so far. So first, I would like to ask our panelists to discuss the major achievements, and then we will follow up with the problems and challenges that the implementation of the agreements faced. So if I may, I would ask Donika about the major results of the dialogue, and so how is it seen from Kosovo's perspective?
Thanks, Anna. Hi, it's my pleasure to be part of this panel discussion, among partners and friends. I really wish this panel could have, taken place in person, but these are the circumstances. I recently came back from Belgrade, in which we actually talked about the 8 years of the Brussels Agreement. It's a long time, I mean, given the expectations that always have been created, even in Kosovo or Serbia, mostly in Kosovo, but also by by the facilitator, in this case the EU, that the agreement will come shortly. I mean, at some point they even, dare to actually have timeframes and potential deadlines to it. I mean, just recently Lajčák said that the agreement might come in months, but it depends on the political will of the parties. It's kind of playing with words and creating expectations, which then, when you then talk about, when you see the actual process and the elements of it and its success and challenges, then the reality says different. I mean, if you look back in history, 2013 marked a period in which the so-called technical dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia had ended. And then all of a sudden we were exposed to a new process which would be political. Although, I mean, it's a general understanding, and even, by the facilitator back then of the technical dialogue, that nothing between Kosovo and Serbia can be technical because of this heavy political complexity of the issue. And then the first perception towards the agreement was, what is this? I mean, what did we sign for? Because, I mean, lack of transparency always followed the process of dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. And in the beginning in Kosovo, we wanted to deconstruct it, what it is that we have signed. And in Kosovo, of course, because of the ambiguity, it was considered as one step towards getting recognition from Serbia. In Serbia, and Igor can tell us, how was it, basically sold to the public? And for the EU, it was a milestone, historic agreement. I mean, in Balkans, we have a lot of historic agreements which then end up either not being agreements or not being implemented. But it was a historic moment also for the EU to prove itself as an international actor in actually dealing with negotiations, especially in a region which is of utmost importance for the EU itself. If you look 8 years back, we have to divide it into phases in a way, because in the beginning that was, of course, it was deconstructing, knowing what we signed, and then trying to build an action plan to see if there are capacities to actually implement it, or if there is a political will to implement it, because there is one element of this agreement, such as the association of Serbian majority municipalities, that is still becoming an issue between the two parties, and it will soon probably be discussed, because Serbia is constantly pushing for it, and it's an agreement that we have ratified in our parliament, qualifying it as an international agreement, meaning that there is an certain obligation by Kosovo to implement it. On the other hand, there are other elements such as police, for instance, which in the beginning worked quite well. If you look at the way that the former MUP members have been integrated into Kosovo police, there have been a lot of challenges and issues with the vetting process, training, and how did they select people, from the civil protection and from the Serbian MUP to actually become part of Kosovo police. But then at some point it stopped, because then there was the Alba Forum, in which our two presidents kind of sent the message that the integration has failed. Now we try with something new, which is, let's try to be territorial and see if that will work too. Then, in a way, you could see a line in between these two periods, because up until 2018, parties, especially in Kosovo, at least tried to look like they are implementing agreements, that they are working towards it, that they are, at least doing it for the sake of ticking boxes approach towards Brussels. But after 2018, everything sort of went kind of off, because Brussels was nowhere to be found. And then there was, the high involvement of Brunel and with Vučić and Thaci, the new agreements signed under his facilitation at the Munich Security Conference, but then the one in DC as well, agreements or letter of intent. And then, it was very hard for Lajčák to pick up where it was left off by Mogherini. And then, of course, now with the new government in Kosovo, kind of having different circumstances and also approach towards the Brussels agreement, because if not now, then when will this agreement be revisited, or at least, sort of, I don't know, like a look at the points or elements in which we were successfully implementing, and see what we can do about those that we haven't been, implementing or have been causing political crisis in Kosovo. So yeah, I mean, if you look at some elements such as the creation of 4 municipalities in the north, yes, there are. Are there parallel institutions? Yes, there are. So meaning that, the progress is there, but not entirely. Are they having issues with Lista Srpska in the northern part of Kosovo, but also like the entire Serbian population in Kosovo being monopolized by a political party, which in a way does not allow any opposition from their community? Yes. And is it part a derivative of the Brussels agreement? In a way it is. And then judicial is, of course, if you look at whether we established an institution there, then yes. But are there problems in functioning? A lot, and they are related to the translation of documents, the workload, and all the issues that are happening now there. So in a way, of course, the agreement signed in Brussels 2011 and until 2013, in a way, did provide to the citizens to some extent, but then they are, at some point, they're completely detached from the citizens, did not deliver on the needs of the citizens. Citizens were not included in anything. And I was utterly disappointed with the fact that now we have the Serbs in the north who are generally frustrated with Belgrade and Pristina, with both governments, because they have been constantly used as political tools to strengthen their position internally by 2 leaders, and nothing has been delivered to them as the Serbian community living in Kosovo. I mean, if we speak on high politics, there is a lot to be done. I mean, the reset button is somehow there because of the new government in Kosovo, but we still don't know how the new government is going to navigate and how the new government is going to approach the existing agreements between Kosovo and Serbia. Kurti has always referred to them as, agreements that should be revisited, but I'm not sure what does it mean. And he himself never revealed this. Just recently, we had some principles based on which the dialogue will be developed. But the fact that in May, the parties are going there separately to meet with Lajčák and not together is somehow a progress, but it really shows that 8 years after, the parties cannot even sit on the same table, that the parties have grown apart in a way to the extent that there is even polarization. The parties have constantly generated instability and have built the narratives internally that will not make it easy to sell any agreement so far, neither in Kosovo nor Serbia. I mean, in Kosovo, that dialogue is not priority. In Serbia, you have declaring war to Kosovo almost every day. So 8 years after, I mean, I wouldn't qualify it as a failure, but the process has a lot of shortcomings, and the ambiguity, the EU approach, the other external actors, the lack of genuine approach of the parties, in a way, heavily contributed to the current situation that we have. I'll stop here for the first intervention because I've gone, a lot of places. But I'm open to see, to hear what Igor has to say in this regard, so that we can discuss it together.
Okay. First, to say that I'm sorry, probably I will be a bit more slow than usually because I just recovered from the coronavirus, so it affects actually my abilities. But anyhow, regarding the Brussels agreement, me and my colleague Shpetin Gashi from the Council for Inclusive Governance, we have produced a certain report several months ago on the results of the implementation of the Brussels dialogue, and our conclusion was that actually the results are far better than it is perceived in public. That actually around 80% of agreements were actually implemented, and of course there are elements that are not implemented at all, like the association of Serb majority municipalities. and some elements that are partially implemented, but overall the results are more or less good. And the problem with this is actually the narrative that surrounds the agreements, how it was interpreted in our respective publics, both in Kosovo and in Serbia, and what was the discourse that was presented by the politicians. So that is the major obstacle. And furthermore, as Donika also said, agreements were followed first by constructive ambiguity, so both sides were interpreting in their own way what was agreed. Second thing was that there was no clear implementation plan with penalties for the sides. What will happen when they do not implement it? So the implementation dragged on. This and it was challenged by daily issues between Belgrade and Pristina. Also, what is important to stress is that both sides used this issue for their internal purposes. I mean, it's always easy. I guess it's always more easy to talk about issues related to, I don't know, national security, fate of nation, etc., than to talk about jobs, about economy, about realistic challenges that are there. Also, what we should take into account is the fact that back in the day in 2011 and in 2013, the prospect of the EU integration, at least for Serbia, was very real there. And it was basically the major political cleavage on the Serbian political scene. If we recall, just for example, in 2008, SPS, Milosevic's party, entered the government with the DS when they turned the cloak and accepted the EU integration process as valid and as a goal for Serbia. Also happened when the Serbian Radical Party split into two, and now ruling SNS, Serbian Progressive Party, also turned the cloak and said they are supporting the EU integrations. So back at the day, the EU integration process of Serbia was the most important thing at the Serbian in the Serbian political discourse, and therefore our government had to deliver on Kosovo, to do something. So it started with technical negotiations, and then we had in 2013 Brussels agreement, and then a number of agreements that elaborated elements from the Brussels agreement. And the problem now is that the EU integration is weak. The promise is there. We had it in 2003, and then we had it in the so-called recent strategy for enlargement. I think it was in 2019. Then again, we have every time something in through the Berlin process, but effectively, I think that citizens feel that the promise, I mean, it's far away. Who knows when it will happen? And furthermore, what we have in Serbia is that our political elite is strongly de-evaluating the worth of the process of the EU integrations, probably because they are aware that that could cost them also staying in power. So, but let me move back. Let me move back to the implementation. Actually, what we have now is sort of that agreements with which sides, and especially citizens from both sides, I would say, are not happy with, have been implemented. There are some solutions, we can call them not complete because they are a result of the compromise, but something was done. And probably it would be good that in a process that follows, we should revisit this and instead somehow upgrade all of these achievements. For example, freedom of movement. On the other hand, some of these elements will be tackled through the Berlin process. We already heard that the freedom of movement, all of the Western Balkans will be again the topic on the next meeting of the Berlin process. So I think that also these negotiations between Serbia and Kosovo should be also put into the regional perspective. So how to use the dynamics at the regional level, and I'm specifically referring to the Berlin process and not to mini Schengen, because Berlin process is something that is more acceptable, I would say, to Pristina and the others. and how to use both dynamics. Now, regarding the political situation in this moment, it's rather complicated. First of all, when Lajčák came, I think that he was overly optimistic, too much optimistic. I mean, in that moment, with a weak government in Kosovo, with Serbia in front of the elections, it was far from. I mean, it was really tough to proclaim that the agreement is coming in months, especially when we have history of negotiations with troubled troubled results of achieving compromises and then with troubled implementation. So and then also, I mean, many people were saying that this incremental process step by step was bad, but in fact we have some results with it. And I think that the main problem of the previous Lajčák process, so with the previous government in Kosovo, was problematic because it was proclaimed, the principle which was proclaimed, nothing is agreed before everything is agreed. I think that is highly problematic, and that could actually kill the process, because when you reach the agreement, it's better to do something, to implement it, than to leave it to hang there and then to wait for the final solution. Also, what I heard, that the elements that were agreed regarding in the process between where Mr. Hiseni and Petar Petković have participated are, documents that are long half a page, 2/3 of a page. And for the really serious issues like missing persons, like property, and that is extremely challenging. So if you have, it's then mere outlining of principles than actual agreement, because if there is no detailed implementation plan, vision of sticks and carrots for the side, to stick to the implementation, I think that is the best recipe for this process to drag indefinitely for the next 50 years. Now, regarding the consequences for Kosovo, yeah, I can say that many things for citizens there are lacking. But actually, when Donika said, and I'm sorry for intervening and trying to directly respond to you, but I would just like all of us to remember what was the situation before 2013. So many complain now we have Serb list, the political scene, Serb political scene in Kosovo is not open, but I cannot escape the feeling that if there is a no Serb list, we would have the similar situation in 2013. So the political parties in the north that are not willing in any case to cooperate with Pristina. So I'm not now trying to defend the government in Belgrade or anyone. I'm just trying to connect facts. So probably we would have political parties in the south, like it was Serbian Independent Liberal Party, which accepted the integration in 2008. But probably in the north we would have the similar situation like we had before 2013. And I guess that this is a reality. So I would stop here because, like Donika said, I went to many directions. So let's continue with your questions.
Yes, actually, so beyond dealing with the major achievements, you already touched upon the issues of the major problems and challenges of the implementation, and also some additional impacts of how the dialogue so far has been carried out and tried to be implemented. And I can just confirm also from previous discussions that the challenge of how to deal with this constructive ambiguity that so far seemed to make the whole process move became just the obstacle of the implementation. And there might be expectations that the parties will somehow tend to rather find out how to sort out the differences after these agreements, but actually it just turned out that in the implementation process, the expectations and the ideas on implementation just started to diverge from each other, and it did not go to the same direction. And as it was already pointed out, that there is the community / association of Serb majority Serb majority municipalities, which is in the one of the hot issues when it comes to the implementation. Obviously there was it was ratified as it was noted, but also on the other hand there was a constitutional court decision in Kosovo that not all the point of this agreement is in line with the Kosovo constitution, and there is a fear that there might be another Republika Srpska, just to remind on the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Donika, and also ask Igor, how do you see the what could be a kind of solution in this regard? So is there any kind of middle way solution that might be able to bring closer to these standpoints, or it seems to be totally unimplementable in Kosovo?
Well, I don't know the solution, first of all. This is, yeah, I mean, we have been discussing quite a lot in Kosovo. I mean, we know the solution. If you look at how we would envisage the status of the association, then there have been quite a lot of initiatives. I'm not sure if Igor participated in one, but it was Friedrichshaber-Stiftung, in a way, gathered people, experts from Pristina and Belgrade. They sat together. It was a very hard process of trying to come up with how would it look like. I mean, this just, you know, to have it as a proposal for the government of Kosovo. Now, yes, it was ratified in the parliament, but then sent to the constitutional court. And as you mentioned yourself, the decision of the constitutional court says that there are like a lot of points of this agreement, I think around 15, that are actually against the constitutional spirit, which means that, you know, Kosovo as a multi-ethnic state would not allow something, you know, of mono-ethnic, you know, association to be created within the country. And then, you know, if you look back at what happened since 2013 when the agreement has been signed, because I mentioned before, there is the constructive ambiguity, you know, problem in which parties many times agreed and signed agreements, and then when they deconstructed it, then you know, kind of found out that it's problematic to be implemented or even to be accepted by the citizens, in this case of Kosovo. So if you look back at what happened since 2013, Kosovo has been going through a lot of political crisis triggered by either what happened within the dialogue, the agreements within the dialogue, or how the governments actually perceive the dialogue, or how they did envisage the process to look like, or whether they blocked the dialogue, like it was the case with Haradinaj with the 100% tariffs, and then Kurti also the first time back in 2020, not really going along with the Tashkent and Vučić-Grenell agreement, and then of course the government being overthrown. So this issue will come up again because it came up in 2020. I mean, even after signing the DC agreement, it was the Serbian party that actually set it as a condition, as a precondition to actually go back to the dialogue, or if not, they constantly use it as the first, wanted it to be pushed as the first element to be discussed within the parties, because they knew that this would create problems in Pristina. And if the problems are created in Pristina, the dialogue would be put on hold. If the dialogue is put on hold, then of course it works for the benefits of Vučić, and this is also mentioned by Igor. The dragging feet strategy is something that would definitely bring a lot of benefits politically for a person who wants to stay in power without and keep good relations with you without having to deliver on organized crime and many other, like corruption and many other issues that are pressing internally in Serbia. Now, if you look at how the process will go from now on, well, I'm not sure, because Kurti was very open and explicit in a way, stating that no monoethnic association can be formed. So now, as we stand, we have two different positions that at some point they exclude each other, because from Serbia, they want an association that has been agreed in Brussels, which then can potentially create an association with executive powers, which then, of course, in Kosovo triggers a lot of fears as something that would look like Republika Srpska. And when you saw the non-paper these days, you kind of get the feeling that at some point it might become an issue, not just for the seceding, but also for the internal functioning of the country, because well, you can be recognized by Serbia and part of the UN, but you can still be a dysfunctional country internally, which then can create a lot of problems for Kosovo. And then the second position is the position of the Kosovo government, according to which, if the association is formed based on the constitutional court, it means that the association will be just like an NGO, like the one that I'm leading now, an NGO that is registered at the, like Department for NGOs, Ministry of Interior and Public Administration, and basically would function as the association of the Albanian municipalities, which in a way is like some sort of NGO bringing mayors of municipalities discussing local issues, which was quite relevant now during the COVID-19 pandemic, but quite silent in many other issues. I see this becoming as a problem again. I mean, what I consider to be problematic from the Kosovo side is that, of course, knowing that Vučić would always come up with this, the Kosovo side should be prepared on having the counter proposal in a way, not counter proposal, but at least, what was with Hodi's government previously is that whenever association was mentioned, there was, a statement saying that that's where we draw our red lines, and then, kind of refusing to talk about it. And this is a problem, because you don't refuse to talk about it, you talk about it, you negotiate it. And you always, should have a counter proposal when it comes, in order to find a middle ground. Other than that, if we just, keep following the logic that we don't know what we don't want, we know what we don't want, but we don't know what we want, this is quite problematic. And it has been very problematic in the past in Kosovo. So, well, that's going to be Lajčák's challenge, to be honest, because, he's meeting with the parties soon. And now we know that also the EU and US kind of are trying to align when it comes to the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. So there will be a lot of attention put to the region, but specifically to solving the bilateral disputes between Kosovo and Serbia. So I really I'm hopeful at least that the government of Kosovo will sit with a lot of experts and try to come up with a position that would be something that Kosovo would be willing to implement and negotiate with Serbia. If the situation continues this way, we will have a dialogue on hold, dragging feet for another decade probably. And again, after 8 or 10 years, we'll be sitting with Igor, hopefully not, because hopefully we'll move on to a better world. But we will be sitting and again, trying to assess the agreement signed or the situation within the dialogue. So what I'm expecting from the new government is a constructive approach, a very well prepared position of the country internally, but then of course towards Serbia and towards our strategic partners, and take things seriously. Blocking processes will only do harm to both sides and to the citizens. So let's think about the citizens. Let's think about really what we can do to deliver to our citizens here in Kosovo, like in this case, the Serbian community.
I will really would like to get back later on the recent approach of the Kosovo government on this issue, but also just to talk a bit because there was a huge change in Kosovo actually when it comes to the political decision makers elite. So now we might face a totally different approach than we will definitely see a different approach from the Kosovo government than before. But before going to deeper in that part, I will continue with Igor on this issue when it comes to, I mean, obviously from a Serbian perspective, and also make a question how, because obviously partly it was pointed out that the EU integration process now it's getting slower, it's getting too far. So okay, they can always raise the question of the Serb majority municipalities, but is it just for, you know, they know that it won't be accepted, so it will block the process, or there might be also some more constructive approach?
To be honest with you, first, in 2013, when the agreement was signed, my impression when I saw that, and I'm now talking about my own standpoints. My impression when I saw this agreement and these 6 points on Serb majority municipalities and which powers it was supposed to have, I thought it is just a mirage. It's a thing to be sold to the citizens of Serbia for accepting that four municipalities in the north will eventually become fully integrated into Kosovo system. So in essence, if you look at the actual competences and the autonomy, it's nowhere near Republika Srpska. And second, it's not a compact territory, it's not connected. So basically the only chip there is the north and everything else is completely, detached. And then we got, so my impression back then was, okay, this is something, just, because also, I don't know if you recall, but we have a similar institution in Croatia, Association of Serb Majority Municipalities in Eastern Slavonia. We have something like that also in Bosnia, in Federation of Bosnia. And in both cases, these institutions are not, not that important or even visible. I mean, they are rarely there. So my impression was that this association issue was that the association was not an issue, and also my personal impression is that after 2015, if the association was implemented as it was foreseen by both agreements, that Serbia, that the process of normalization would go in different direction. And that Serbia, and also that the EU integration process of Serbia would have gone differently. So all the negotiations and everything. But but in 2015, Mr. Kurti and then also Mr. Haradinaj led the protests against the association, claiming that it would undermine the internal stability of Kosovo. And then we also got this decision of the Constitutional Court. I would also like to remind you that there is a decision of Constitutional Court of Serbia about the 2013 Brussels Agreement, because the Democratic Party of Serbia sent the agreement to the Constitutional Court, which basically said this is not a legal agreement, this is just a political statement. So, and it does not affect in any way the Constitution of Serbia. But this decision did not prevent the government of Serbia to continue with negotiations and with implementation of the agreements. And now the ASM from actually a solution for the accepting the integration of the four northern municipalities into the Kosovo system became a stumbling block and a useful chip, because in Kosovo discourse, it was created an impression that this is completely undermining the internal stability of Kosovo. For me, when I also 2015 agreement, if you look at it, yeah, it's basically taking some of the competences that exist at the level of municipalities, and it just brings them to the higher level. But in essence, you know, it does not mean taking anything from the central level. Maybe the danger there is a bit more in symbolic elements. For example, there will be a president of the Serb majority municipality of the association, and I think also the vice president. So they will be basically, you know, the president of all the Serbs in Kosovo. Maybe that is a challenge. I don't know. But now we have a stumbling block, and probably we will have not we, but the sides will have to revisit it. And I don't know what will be the compromise on that. Furthermore, also let me remind you, I mean, one of the biggest opponents to the Brussels agreement, to the end negotiations with Pristina from year 2000 until 2012 was precisely the current ruling elite. They were the ones who were against any compromises regarding Kosovo, and then when they came to power, they changed that approach. Maybe we can apply also that same logic to Mr. Kurti. So maybe something that is needed right now. Let's see what will happen. We will have local elections in Kosovo. So I don't think that before that Kosovo side will be able to strike any, I mean, to have any really constructive approach because of the domestic discourse. And then I don't think that even now, despite the decisive victory, Mr. Kurti has enough internal power for major breakthroughs. People are talking about tough compromises, so both tough and compromise. So for achieving that, I would be even far away from thinking that Kurti might be poised in the future to do something that Vučić did in 2014, to have another round of elections and to sweep his opponents exactly like SNS did in Serbia in 2014 and 2016, and then he will be able to reach and implement these top compromises. But this is just thinking.
Yeah, if I may, Anna, directly, because it's linked to what Igor was saying. Snap elections in Kosovo, we are fed up with elections, and like the reactions just before electing the president in Kosovo, in which the country was risking, during which the country was risking to have another snap elections. I mean, the reaction of the people in general was that we are fed up, and I don't think with the dossier it is very unlikely to get to become even more powerful by just trying to repeating the same strategy as it did before. So well, I hope that's not going to be the case, because the country, besides the dialogue with Serbia, has a lot of internal, multi-dimensional issues related to COVID-19 and of course the economic collapse during this year. As for the association, I totally agree with you. It's what is important to be discussed here is the lack of trust. Because I mean, this is a paranoia that we have every time there is a development. I mean, the expectations are always for the worst. I mean, just if you look at the reactions, for instance, before the DC agreement, we expected the end of the world. Like they were talking about changing borders and like the Balkans going back to the legacies of the 90s. It was a lot of panic among us in Kosovo. And then the agreement was there, and it was just like, man, it had elements that have been already discussed within the EU framework, mini Schengen, Berlin process, CEFTA, everything was there that has been before, besides the recognition from Israel and some elements related to 5G, which were more connected to, economic interests of the US and towards the Chinese rather than, relevant for the parties. And this is with the association as well. And this would probably be with every single deal that is being organized because of the internal narratives. I mean, because the parties have never prepared the population, the citizens, for something that might bring them to narrow them or bring across their paths at some point. What both parties have done is that they have declared war to each other, because it was, for them convenient to basically have instability. I mean, you can name like a lot of incidents that have taken place, like the train incident, and then Marko Đurić being arrested and dragged, brought all the way from the north to Pristina to be dragged in the main square. So basically, and then the Alba Forum, it was like always, the parties trying to send messages that there might be something, a conflict between the two countries. So having this, not creating societal cohesion in relation to the dialogue, they have missed it. So now, not just the association, but every development will have like a skeptic eye, because it will be something like, oh well, what do we gain, what do we lose, what's the compromise? I mean, how painful the compromise is going to be. I mean, even now the letter that has been sent to Osmani, Biden's letter, it starts with a very personal tone of mentioning his family relations to Kosovo, but then in the end mentions the compromise that the countries will have to make in the dialogue process, meaning that there is something is going to happen, and the parties have to prepare themselves, but also to prepare their citizens for what's coming next. If it continues this way, with Kurti sort of creating the expectation that the dialogue is not a priority, but then meeting it, and in reality going to Brussels now, next week, or like creating the perception that we don't need to be in the process because Kosovo has a lot of internal issues to deal with, and then afterwards maybe we will talk to Serbia or not. This will further, create, this a negative approach towards the process, and then the BCSP sort of survey was the best reflection of it. The lack of trust, the lack of transparency, and the paranoia that exists around the process. However, there is still a lot of support for the process, and this is a unique opportunity to sort of do it, but do it right. So I'm really hoping that LICHAC member states will definitely put a lot of energy in this process. And what is important to be mentioned in this regard is the EU integration perspective. I mean, what's in there for the parties? What's the end goal? Because when it started like something like that: normalize your relations. The EU will be the facilitator. As a facilitator, it will do everything to pave your way towards EU integration. And now we have, like, after 2013, when Serbia had the accession negotiations open, and then Kosovo getting the SAA, the rest has been, just going back and forth without clear perspective. In this case, there is also the visa liberalization for Kosovo. I mean, if you look at, like the EU, like after politicizing the process to the point that, the demarcation with Montenegro was, put in there as a condition, in addition to the technical, technicalities and technical benchmarks. Now there are a lot of member states which, in a way, are trying to hijack and to integrate the visa liberalization process, or interlink it with the dialogue, which is going to be devastating and very problematic, here in Kosovo, because you cannot politicize, something like visa liberalization and clearly not link it with the dialogue, because that's not, EU integration. If Colombia and Taiwan have it, but it's not related to the integration process. It's just, a technicality. I mean, it really depends on now how the investment that our strategic partners will put in this process, but also the willingness that comes from the two governments. We will have a lot to see after the meeting in Brussels, but I totally agree with Igor. Nothing's going to happen this year, not because of the elections in Kosovo, but because of the dynamics of the process, but also because there are elections in Germany. I hate to depend all the, all the elections in the world kind of interlinked with this process, but, it will be very, very interesting to see like the power dynamics in Germany, who will take over the gap left by Germany, you know, during this period of transition. Will it be taken over by Macron? And we know that Macron has a different approach towards the dialogue, but also towards the final agreement. And then how this gap is going to be filled, and what will be the development. So what is imperative for the EU now is to support Lajčák, because I mean, Lajčák is being challenged, but also does not have the political power to do anything. I mean, you know the External Action Service, and you know how difficult it is to operate in such environment. So it's like a lot of uncertainty, but let's hope that this, you know, gap will be used as a way to go back to a dialogue which is based on principles and values and transparency. God knows how many times we have been doing transparency to you know, like to an allowed extent. We know that negotiations are a complex process, but you know, transparency, bottom-up approach, societal cohesion are the elements that will definitely make the process more successful.
And the end of constructive ambiguity.
Oh, that, get rid of that. No, that's not going to work.
I mean, we need unified interpretation and commitment from leaders to restrain from using the dialogue outcomes for their own political purposes.
And instabilitocracy like a pro, which is quite problematic. Okay. But yes, totally, I agree on that.
If you allow me, I would like to channel into the discussion the questions coming from the audience. Some related to the future developments, but there is also one from my colleague, the last one, Markus, who is former ambassador of Hungary in Pristina. And he's asking, what is your view, how come that the business communities are so weak in both countries to push for a more robust dialogue? There was Haradinaj, Kurtin, plus Đurić, Vulin, and Dačić have been able to threaten business interests without consequences and even loud reactions from business circles. And the question is, why is it so? So that's the first question. This is more related to the practice that was carried out so far, but there are also questions regarding the future. One coming from Mr. Henry Kraft. He is mentioning that in the EU General Affairs Council meeting of the Portuguese presidency put the enlargement process back on the agenda. 7 EU foreign ministers have urged to push the process forward again. And the question is, would EU accession of North Macedonia and Montenegro also have a positive effect on the politicians and the general public in Serbia and Kosovo, that EU accession is a realistic option and in the not so far future? And also another question from my colleague, Ferenc Németh. I mean, it's related to Vučić-Kurti duo. How would you characterize the possible duo as leaders of the normalization? Can they cooperate at all? Is it safe to assume that Kurti would lead the dialogue from Kosovo's side, or is there is a chance that President Vjosa Osmani would take the leading role? I might ask Donika, because we haven't talked too much about the elections in Kosovo in February, which actually caused the change. It would be nice if you would just put the elections and the election results into context shortly, so those who might not so much familiar with the domestic politics in Kosovo, just to understand that what was the major change in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, elections in Kosovo, the latest elections, because we recently had elections every year. I mean, they are considered as historic because they really did bring power change, you know, in the sense that the old ruling elite, meaning all of them, are now in the opposition, and a party which has been in the opposition since, well, like in the past 10 years, has finally made it to power. And we are talking about, I mean, the real change comes from the fact that, you know, Vetvedosia is a grassroots initiative which has been established decades ago and made it all the way to the top through elections. Elections which were considered free and fair and well organized. So in terms of that, you know, in Kosovo, we kind of proved that elections can really change because of this power shift, of course, but then there is a lot to be seen on how the new government is going to take over, because it's just a date that marks, I think, 1 month since they have been in power, and they have, you know, sort of been dealing with a lot of crisis since then. Yes, I mean, this means that a lot of things will change in the dialogue as well, because Kurti was never part of the process, so he has no ownership whatsoever. I mean, yes, there is the fact that Kosovo has been, you know, part of this process, and of course he is kind of entering it with a lot of history, almost 10 years of history. But it's interesting because, I mean, Kurti came to power by literally criticizing and opposing everything that has been happening in the process of the dialogue. So now any change in his approach towards the process is going to be under the radar, because by the opposition, of course, first, because it was Kurti was the biggest nightmare of the opposition in every step of their development and then their path in the Brussels dialogue. Now we will see, but Kurti over the years has changed a lot from a leader that has been opposing the dialogue, because it was him that came first with the motto that we don't want negotiations with Serbia, all the way to yes, negotiation, but you know, with conditions, and to yes, negotiations, because I mean, this is a process in which he, in a way, he has inherited, and it's irreversible and very politically costly for Kosovo to now, you know, withdraw from the process, if not impossible. I mean, it means a lot because, but it's also a challenge, because Kurti is coming from without institutional memory. In Kosovo, there was this discontinuation of the process every time a government changed in Kosovo. I mean, now Kurti claims that there is nothing left from the Hoti negotiations in 2020. This was confirmed just yesterday by the deputy prime minister of the country, meaning that the lack of transparency, the lack of inclusion in Kosovo internally, but also this strategy, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, basically now leaves the new government of Kosovo kind of uninformed and not really knowing how to navigate in such a complex process, which is quite problematic. How do I see Kurti and Vučić? I mean, I cannot imagine a meeting between the two of them. It is very hard to actually, I know, even seeing Kurti and Thaçi in Kosovo internally was problematic because of the position that Kurti comes from. It's not just, you know, by the fact that Vučić is a Serb and there is a negotiation going on between the two countries. But even back then, you know, seeing Kurti and Thaçi sitting right next to each other when Thaçi was the president, Kurti was taking over the mandate as the prime minister of Kosovo, was extremely difficult even for them. Like I think the meeting lasted like 8 minutes. They just couldn't wait to leave the room. So it's going to be uncomfortable, but I mean, Kurti has to learn how to navigate, because I mean, Vučić is, you know, the president of Serbia. We can not decide who sits, you know, on the table and who represents the other country or the other parties. So a full stop. As for the Kurti's position in the dialogue is unquestionable, because there is a constitutional court ruling. I have mentioned 3 rulings of the constitutional court already because it's super active. So there is a constitutional court opinion based on which the dialogue is led by the prime minister in coordination with the president. So it involves also Vjosa Osmani as the president of Kosovo, and to be overseen by the parliament. And this, I think, dates back to 2018-19, when the government has created this negotiation team with a negotiation platform. So yeah, I mean, Kurti is new. that's why we don't know how he will behave. He has never been part of the process. He needs probably a lot of help. He needs a lot of support by the opposition as well, because as Igor mentioned, he has a lot of power, but not enough to push everything forward without the consent of other parties in the parliament, but also, of course, the importance of including civil society and other experts in academia is always there. As for the presidency, I mean, we didn't expect that much from the Portuguese presidency. We are expecting kind of a lot from the Slovenians, but after this non-paper, we don't know what to expect. There is a lot of hope that at least, the negotiations for Albania and North Macedonia will open. This way, it will create a feeling that the process is going, and then there is an end goal, and it will, in a way, provide an incentive for both Kosovo and Serbia to engage in the dialogue, believing that the EU integration process is there. And lastly, for the business community, I don't come from that field of expertise, but the economic chambers of Kosovo and Serbia have been cooperating quite a lot. I mean, they have been always qualified as story of success, but then their role in lifting the 100% tariff towards Serbian goods was zero. So it's all political. I mean, the businesses can push us as much as they can. There is the freedom of movement agreement in a way that, and customs agreement, which was signed in the technical dialogue, which paved the way and created circumstances for them at least to cooperate. But their role has been minimal in the dialogue, and hoping that at least Putin from Kosovo will have an inclusive approach, because I cannot speak on behalf of Serbia. The business community would definitely need to be consulted and included in the process, at least in the experts group level. So yeah, this is an overview of I didn't provide that much on the elections, because then it will be another panel discussion of us discussing the dynamics, but the change is good, because at least we are challenging a system which hasn't been really working in the past 20 years. So the change is good, but of course, whether it is a real change, then we'll have to see, especially, to give us 100 days to qualify it as it is, and let alone, more until the mandate is over.
Okay. First, regarding the EU accession, Donika already said, I think that the successes regarding the accession processes, so negotiation processes actually, of North Macedonia and Montenegro are essential for the region. Basically, all the stumbling blocks that these two countries experienced in the past few years actually extremely de-evaluated the process in the eyes of the citizens throughout the Western Balkans. So we had this so-called strategy of enlargement. Actually, it was a communication of EU Commission, but nevertheless, we had something there. We had some positive effects, and then after what happened with these two countries, I mean, how can you profess something and then have different outcomes? And to see that some of the EU member states, because of their own internal discourses, internal reasons, stop something that is good for the whole region and sends a good message and actually strengthens the leverage of the EU in the region. I mean, I don't understand that, because it's a short-term logic, and they are not thinking about the benefits in the future and all the things that the EU and themselves could write in the future. But yeah, so in total, I think that we desperately need a success with these two countries regarding the EU negotiation processes, which could be sold to the citizens throughout the Balkans. So a renewal of the role of the EU in the region. Regarding the business community, actually, we did some research there. First of all, Serbia mainly exports to Kosovo. Kosovo exports a fraction of it to Serbia. And the structure of export are mainly goods like sugar, flour, etc., which could be easily, exported somewhere else. So in essence, if we have just big importers in Kosovo and then big exporters that do not necessarily have to export to Kosovo, there is the answer why the business community was not that vocal. Of course, there are small companies that are interlinked and that were very affected with the tariff. I have one example. I know one small machine industry company from Niš who is cooperating with a similar company from Pristina, and they were really affected by taxes, but their voices are not that strong. So and that is also the problem. So we probably need to think also how to interlink better the economies in the region, and then we would have also stronger voices coming from the business sector. In this moment, the business sector is interlinked almost completely with the political elites, and that is a challenge. And regarding Vučić-Kurti, yes, from this perspective, nobody hopes for much, but we witnessed in the past that political leaders came to an understanding, let's say, when there are clear motivations. Just in case of Vučić, so he found out some sort of a common interest for cooperation with Mr. Tadić. Despite all of the bad words that were exchanged in past 20 years. So, and then also regarding Mr. Dodik, Vučić and him were on opposing sides 10 years ago. And also regarding Mr. Zaev and Vučić just 3 or 4 years ago. So things can change. I mean, and I would not be that negative regarding what could happen. It depends actually on political dynamics on both sides. It depends on interests, and some things could happen if there is, alignment of those interests.
Thank you very much. I received another question from our Czech colleague from European, Jana Juzova. She's thanking the great discussion and also wondering, apparently President Biden has been suggesting that the continuation of the dialogue should lead to a mutual recognition. Do you see this as a realistic outcome, or do you think it is achievable under the current Serbian leadership? And if so, under what conditions? And as she had as a comment, this is mostly for Igor.
I mean, question. I don't dare to go into that, but I think that Vučić was quite specific. And me and Donika, we had a discussion, I think in December, organized by one Polish institute, in which I explained that actually it seems that Vučić wanted something in return when we were talking about exchange of territories that he could sell to the citizens, probably in exchange for recognition. Probably, I mean, they are doing, and he himself said that they are doing opinion polls almost every week, and he perfectly knows what is the attitude of citizens. And I guess that is the direction. Otherwise, I mean, first, what I would aim, first, let's not speak about recognition. Recognition is something that could be an outcome, but what is desperately needed is the change of the way how present the other side. It's a normalization of communication, of total freedom of movement. I mean, a complete and radical change of situation that would actually then allow us to think about the different solutions. In this moment, I mean, in this kind of polarized discourse, when people are talking, in Serbia at least, about Greater Albania, about the dangers that Kurti poses, and all of that, I don't think that somebody could come after all that bombardment of citizens with negative information that somebody could come and would say, okay, let's recognize Pristina. Let's recognize Kosovo. It will not happen.
But recognizing Kosovo can probably diminish the risk of a greater Albania in any case.
No, you know, this is exactly, you got the point, and this is exactly the thing for one wider debate, but I would not dare to.
No, it just came up here because we have been obsessed with recognition, and then I forgot what is the process about. I mean, recognition, of course, is imperative, and in a way, you know, mutual recognition, as it is being mentioned by Biden, and it was like in letters sent to Vučić and now to Osmani, because of, you know, like literally just making the countries functioning and existing around each other without making each other's lives impossible. But then the way on how you reach that is not really clarified by neither Kosovo, neither Serbia. So it's like not, the parties haven't been really, we talked about their normalization, but what are the steps that will lead to recognition has never been sort of discussed in Kosovo. Like at some point was even conditioned with lifting 100% tariffs, you know, which went off track completely. I do believe that if there is a recognition, at least in Biden's letters, it's probably related to the association of the Serbian municipalities, because this has been an agreement, an element that has been highly pushed by the US in cooperation with the EU when the Brussels Agreement has been negotiated. Because, I mean, we know that de facto the US has always been part of the process, sort of providing guidance to the EU, but also to the parties, if not, you know, the case with only Kosovo. So probably this is, I mean, we discussed this yesterday when we saw the letter, whether, you know, the compromise means association or there is something else that, you know, is going to be negotiated, which is going to be even more than the association itself. But yeah, I mean, at this point, I mean, Igor mentioned and explained the position of the Serbian government, which is, I mean, at this point, we kind of even are afraid to think of the Euro recognition, and even the facilitators and the strategic partners have been sort of discussing about the de facto recognition, but then how do you measure it? What does this mean? And is de facto recognition something that Serbia can easily withdraw? I mean, these days you can also withdraw the Euro recognition, as it happened with Kosovo and many countries so far due to the Serbian campaign. So it's really hard to basically see how this recognition would look like, or whether it's going to be acceptance. I just know that, you know, the parties should definitely close the deal with a mutual recognition, meaning that, you know, not just their cooperation in the region, but also within the EU would be constructive and pragmatic. Other than that, it's just going to be probably another similar case to Cyprus, which is going to be sort of in the EU, which is probably not what the EU wants.
Can I just intervene? So regarding Biden's letter, I forgot to mention that. Actually, our friends from the European and Western Balkans compared Trump's letter from a few years ago and Biden's letter, and it turned out that they're almost exactly the same wording. So it's nothing new. I mean, even with the previous president of the US, whose administration showed different attitude, that was the goal. There is no change actually in the US approach. So I would not take it that as that important. It's just a constant goal of the US in the region, and it should be regarded as such.
And yeah, it's just showing that there is US interest in the region, but there are other problematic regions too. And there are many other priorities for Biden internally, but also globally, you know, how it's navigating around the EU and then Russia and China, and there are many other pressing issues in the world. So, but knowing that, you know, there is an administration that you can talk to and cooperate with in a more normal way than with the Trump administration is kind of a good sign. And then the rest depends on, of course, us and then the power dynamics and of course, how we decide to navigate around the reality.
I mean, adding to another aspect to this, I mean, now within the EU, also, I mean, we have non-recognizing countries. There are problems within the EU, so when it comes to like Ireland. I mean, the Brexit caused also new issues when it comes to like this getting some part of the UK independent or not, not mentioning Catalonia in Spain. So there are still open other issues there which can complicate the approach to these recognition questions when it comes to the European Union. So that can also have an impact. And another question that I wanted to raise, and as we are approaching the end of the discussion, I would like to, I mean, there might be time for one or maximum two questions. So if there is any other questions in the audience, please write it in the chat. But meanwhile, what I wanted to raise is one of the questions was related to North Macedonia, for example. And we remember that when basically since the Prespa agreement, which led to the name change of the country, there was a decision in the council that the negotiations were started, but I mean the negotiation framework could not be adopted so far, and the IGC was not held, which pretty much implied that the EU is the EU has its own issues, but that there are more attention on internal reforms and much those rewards that can come with the like a resolution of the bilateral disputes might decrease or just put it into another lights recently. So could that encourage, for example, in Kosovo, the focus on more and Kurti is really much tending to that direction, to focus on internal problems like corruption, organized crime. So would it rather lead to some issues or developments in areas which are very important for the EU integration process and also for visa liberalization, which might be even more important for the citizens of Kosovo than the dialogue as such? So could that even further encourage Kurti to focus on those areas and not pay less attention to the dialogue? And when it comes to Serbia, actually, I just have the opposite tendency. I mean, because there is now the EU integration process is getting longer, so the EU membership seems to be far, and the EU is pretty much not punishing Serbia for the tendencies that is characterizing the areas of rule of law, like judiciary, media freedom, etc. So so the situation, so if there is less attention on the dialogue also in Serbia, so in which direction would move the governance structure to further decline, or there might be a change in the attitude of Vučić to these areas?
So, Donika.
Okay, well, internal issues are important, and Kurti should never be discouraged and never should cease to actually reform the country internally. But Anna, that can take forever. I mean, just look at the most successful case since the Thessaloniki summit, which is Croatia. I mean, it took them a decade, and of course, it will take a similar amount of time for Kosovo, as it taken even more for Serbia, Montenegro, and other countries. So I don't think that these should be interlinked in a way. Yeah, you can do both at the same time. He will be encouraged to work internally. He has the full support of the EU and the US and even the UK on bilateral levels. And but that, rule of law, fighting corruption, and these other issues might help the country to actually get the visa liberalization process, because you will tell the EU member states that you are working on issues that are pressing for them, such as fighting corruption and organized crime, but like not necessarily make it either or with the dialogue. You can work parallelly, and this has been should be done. I mean, what I would strongly encourage Kurti not to do is to engage in stabilitocracy, meaning that by interlinking reforms and dialogue and stability, then basically do what Tashi did before, basically not deliver on reforms, deliver on the dialogue, pretend to be delivering on the dialogue, and just to strengthen its position internally. Yes, the EU perspective, I mean, it depends on the dynamics. You never know. We had, like just in the past decade, we had a lot of ups and downs. I mean, there was no enlargement in 2019, and we had the 2025 agenda. And now seems like there is a lot of issues, of course, with the member states and changing methodology. But, it really is a process that is still sort of ongoing, although with a lot of issues. So what I would like, I know it's utopia, but what I would like the parties to understand is that you don't deliver the reforms for Brussels and for the integration process. You deliver because you really want, it's basic to have a functioning country internally, and that's the key. That should be the key. But in other cases, I mean, from Kurti's perspective, it should be both at the same time. There is a lot of capacities and a lot of energy being put by the EU member states, the EU office, but also like other strategic partners to support him in both. Also another comment in relations to the non-recognizers. This is the biggest issue. I mean, Israel overcame Palestine and recognized Kosovo. What's the excuse for any other member state? I mean, this is the debate in Kosovo. Like, what's the excuse of Spain if Catalonia is an issue, but is it as big as Palestine? Is it like as important of an issue as important as the Israeli and Palestine issue, which would probably not be the case. What shows that the EU is weak is first the visa liberalization process, in which the EU says like, look, like it's the member states, but also like the 5 non-recognizers, hiding behind the member states and not saying like Kosovo has to do it bilaterally. Well, yes, but like it's important. It's impossible to do it bilaterally with Spain because the Spaniards do not even stay in the room where the Kosovars are. I mean, that in some points, they are even more rigid than Serbia, and the Spaniards have basically supported Serbia's campaign against Kosovo in Interpol. So, I mean, the EU should find a way, either through member states or like really should find a way to see how they can help Kosovo, at least in the process of dialogue, to at least, get some sort of communication, if not like de facto recognition from the non-recognizers. I mean, because look at Slovakia. Slovakia is a good non-recognizer in a way, because they have been supporting Kosovo bilaterally. They have a liaison office here. There is communication, there is cooperation. And similarly with Greece, for instance, there is, a meeting between the 2 MFAs, and there is an office of Kosovo there, and there is communication and cooperation, which might lead or might not lead to full recognition, but then at least Kosovo has a chance to do something in this regard. So, I mean, not really helping in this regard for Kosovo was like, what can the EU do? Because, I mean, when Kosovo started the dialogue, there was this perception that in addition to the recognition from Serbia, we will get a seat in the UN, and now we cannot even get like the recognition of 5 member states, and in a process that is being led by the EU, in which member states are part of. Now we have a Slovak and a Spaniard basically in key position when it comes to the dialogue. So this is quite problematic, and it really shows the power that the EU has to actually push forward with dialogue, being such a complex political issue.
Okay, regarding EU is not punishing. Well, for more than a year we did not open any new chapter. Then we have a new methodology. Serbia accepted this new methodology, and now we have a process of adjusting to this new process with clusters. And my overall experience is that actually the application of new methodology will put much stronger emphasis on the rule of law. than it was before, although fundamentals first principle was present even in the moment when Serbia opened the negotiations. So from that perspective, I think that the messages are quite clear. Despite the encouragement that is coming from certain EU officials, I don't think that the EU integration process will continue to drag as it was. There will be much stronger emphasis. Okay, either you do something with this, or it will be stopped, and that's it. Whether that is productive or not, I'm not sure in this moment, because it depends. I mean, many things in the EU integration process happen precisely because of the situation in the Balkans, or because of the situation, internal situation in the EU member states, especially big ones, and they are affecting things here. Okay, let's see. I don't, but truth to be told, I would like to see much stronger emphasis here on fundamentals. That's one. I would like to see a changed approach of the EU, in essence, to know how to use all the things that they are doing for the region for also to promote themselves. So that is not coming because it's expected, but because there is a sort of a goodwill from the European Union. But also I would like to see more consensus among the EU member states. And I would like to see them to stop using the EU enlargement process for their own ends. And we have seen that, for example, in the case of North Macedonia. I mean, that's a horrible message.
Thank you very much. As we reach the end of our discussion, and at least in our time in it, obviously we could talk about this topic much longer, because as our speakers highlighted, it's a very complex topic with many actors and many factors influencing the outcome of the dialogue, as well as how the relations of Kosovo and Serbia is formulated. Unfortunately, I mean, it's hard to really predict what will come when it comes to the dialogue, because also as a consequence of the changes that might come within the European Union with the leaving of Chancellor Merkel, but also the changes that happened in Kosovo with having a new government led by Albin Kurti. And also we see that although Aleksandar Vučić is a kind of long-term actor in this process, so we can name probably like that. But I mean, the circumstances and the changes changed still around him. So we will see in what direction the dialogue will be able to move on. I would like to thank both Donika Emini, the executive director of the platform at Civikos, to join us, as well as Igor Novaković, the research director of the International and Security Affairs Center in Belgrade, to join us and share their views on this very complex topic. And before we leave, I would like to invite those guests here, I mean, speaking Hungarian, that if they have the time to join our event tomorrow afternoon, when we will discuss the many times mentioned the Slovenian non-paper and the questions of border changes, which will the discussion will be moderated by my colleague Julian Niarmash, and Dr. László Markus and Ferenc Németh will discuss this topic. So I really encourage you to join tomorrow as well. If not through Zoom, but it will be also available on Facebook Live, just like these discussions. So if you feel to repeat it because you would like to get back to these thoughts that we shared here, do not hesitate. It will be also on YouTube. So I hope that you like the discussion. Thank you very much again for joining. With great gratitude for our speakers, but also for the audience following us here directly on Zoom and on Facebook. So thank you very much and have a nice afternoon.